also tells you that people are ready to defend their country. Now, President Zelensky decided yesterday to release prisoners who are able to join the military, able to fight. Already a few days ago, he said anyone who is able to hold an arm should get a gun. So a lot of guns have been issued here. Of course, there's the concern also among local citizens that things can go out of control in many ways right now. Anarchy can take over in many places. So far, the situation in Kiev is relatively calm. There was a few sirens going off over the night, but our colleagues, our local colleagues who are still in the city are reporting that at least they had a few hours of sleep. However, they're very, very nervous about what's to happen today, as this bulk of Russian troops is basically almost encircling this entire city and is ready to strike.
Funny, I was just speaking to a resident of Kharkiv, which is under bombardment right now, and access to basic supplies like food and water, essential items, is now becoming very restricted. What's the situation with essential supplies where you are?
It's definitely better so far. We just heard in that report from Kharkiv that you basically are granted one piece of bread per individual. It's not the case here yet. If you go into a supermarket, you'll still find very basic things, depending on also, of course, in which municipality you are and how many supermarkets are open. The ones we've been to, yes, we have seen those empty shelves, but we still had the impression that at least the very basics can still be guaranteed. Now, this can change any time, of course, if there are more attacks, be it on surrounding places in the area here, not just the military warehouses and the military airbase that I pointed out, but if those missiles that are coming actually all the way from Belarus to here where we are right now, when they are going to destroy very critical infrastructure that is needed to actually keep those supply chains open. So people are worried, even the ones who still get their bread and get their even their vegetables in the supermarket today, just how long that's going to happen. As a result, a lot of people stock up on food and panic starts to set in. And also people who are here in this, well, so far was a relatively calm town, are packing up and they are leaving. They're trying to leave across the border to Romania and try to bring their families to safety.
Is there any hope, Fanny, among the people you were talking to there, that a diplomatic solution could be found in this conflict? Because we do have Ukraine and Russia finally sitting down at the negotiating table.
Actually, we were talking about this very question with our neighbors yesterday in the bunker, and they said they would like to have this glimpse of hope, but at the same time, if this country is being bombed while so-called negotiations take place, they don't really hope that's going to be anytime soon. Now, what we do know, of course, that after this meeting between Russian and Ukrainian delegation that ended without a breakthrough so far, we know that a second round is supposed to take place. It's unclear when, but the people here on the ground are actually calling on the allies and the Western allies to say, please help us, please us in terms of military, please help us in terms of humanitarian aid, and please help us to bring an end to this war, to this full-scale invasion. So people don't really have high hopes when it comes to negotiations with the aggressor, as they say, via Belarus. They rather put their faith into whatever is to come from the West.
Fanny, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Fanny Fachar, there in Western Ukraine. Well, the first emergency United Nations General Assembly session in decades opened with a minute's silence for those killed in Ukraine. More than 100 nations have signed up to speak out about Ukraine's invasion at the session, which continues today. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke of a moment of truth for humanity.
A minute of silence to mourn those killed in Russia's days-long ground and air attack on Ukraine. Then nation after nation took to the podium, condemning President Vladimir Putin's war and his decision to put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert.
Excellency, we are facing a tragedy for Ukraine, but also a major regional crisis with potentially disastrous implications for us all. Yesterday, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert. This is a chilling development. The mere idea of a nuclear conflict is simply inconceivable.
A war of this scale seemed inconceivable just days before the invasion. Ukraine's envoy to the UN spoke passionately about civilian suffering in his country and warned that global peace is at stake.
If Ukraine does not survive, international peace will not survive. If Ukraine does not survive, the United Nations will not survive. Have no illusions.
Russia's envoy accused the media of creating fake news about what Putin calls a special military operation and blamed Ukraine for causing the war by mistreating Russian supporters in breakaway regions. This definitely persuaded us that we could no longer ignore the suffering to people in Donbass. The leaders of breakaway regions turned to us for military support. Monday's emergency session of the UN General Assembly lays the groundwork for a resolution members will vote on later in the week. In part, it demands Russia immediately stops its attack and withdraws all troops from Ukraine.
The International Criminal Court in The Hague will launch an investigation on the situation in Ukraine following Russia's invasion. The chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, says there is reasonable basis to believe alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed in the attack. Neither of the two countries, Russia nor Ukraine, are members of the ICC, but Ukraine has accepted its jurisdiction in the past. Russia, for its part, does not recognize the court's authority at all. Our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane, joins us in the studio. Melinda, I know that you covered the Balkan Wars and the ensuing war crimes trials. I also know that you studied international law and are very well versed on this subject. Do you think we could see an indictment in The Hague against Russian President Vladimir Putin?
Or the officers who are, in fact, committing crimes on his orders. Normally, you begin with those who are on the ground and then follow the chain of command upward. And yes, I do. If we look, for example, at these latest reports of the probable use of cluster bombs in Kharkiv, or if we look at a cluster bomb confirmed on February 25th against a kindergarten and nursery in the town of Okhotyrka in Sumy Oblast, and that's been confirmed by Amnesty, then these are absolutely violations that could be pursued by the International Criminal Court, but there are others as well. For example, Russian forces have boasted of eliminating combatants in some of the places they've fought, including at the airport outside of Kiev. You don't simply eliminate combatants. You are required by the laws of war, by the Hague Conventions, to take them prisoner and give them certain kinds of treatment. So there is real reason to believe that war crimes are being committed here. At the same time, Ukraine has also gone to the International Court of Justice on another matter, namely the violation of its territorial integrity. The law on wars of aggression is somewhat more unclear. That wouldn't probably be a charge that we'd see in the International Criminal Court. But I think that the prosecutor's decision to look into this is absolutely justified. And what it means, as I say, you try to chase that chain of command right back up to Vladimir Putin, and then ultimately he is further isolated. He can no longer travel. If he ever leaves his country, he will be subject to arrest. That's the objective, and as we know, it happened to Milosevic in the Balkan.
There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the international community should or could intervene militarily in some form. Of course, Ukraine is not a NATO member. NATO at this point says it has no intention of intervening, but we did see NATO intervene in the Balkan Wars. Could there come a point, Melinda, do you think, when NATO might decide that the suffering of the people, the war crimes being committed, are so severe that it needs to intervene here?
Strictly on the point of law, Essentially, there are two provisions under which force can be used. One is the right to self-defense, which includes collective self-defense. That would obviously be an easier matter if Ukraine were, in fact, a member of NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Therefore, it becomes a little bit more difficult. The clearest path would be a UN Security Council resolution. We're not going to get that. That, by the way, was what happened when Iraq invaded Kuwait. As you will remember, the UN Security Council empowered other countries essentially to help get Iraq out of Kuwait if it didn't leave voluntarily. That is a clearer legal position. But Terry, that's the law side. The other side, of course, is simply pragmatism, reality. The adversary here is a nuclear-armed power. I cannot imagine that NATO would go up against Russia under these circumstances when Ukraine is not a member of NATO. The legal situation is somewhat hazy, and the reality is obviously very problematic.
Okay, so that's the legal aspect with respect to NATO.